I think you guys can see it's homecoming this year, and the reason I named this year that is because we're revisiting some things we've done in the past. Specifically, Jeff Rouse, he's been here. Those of you that were in the club a few years ago, he's coming to kind of refresh us, a refresher course in sleep medicine, and he's an amazing guy. So those of you that haven't heard him speak before, you're in for a treat, and he's always updating his stuff. He's a wonderful guy. So he'll be with us for that's for our next one. That's going to be in October 26th. There is one change. You guys all have all the other titles and the dates and everything of the nights, but on the March date has changed to the 21st. So you guys, that's going to be our you can't move the goalpost night of ethical dilemmas day to day. So those of you that run into an ethical dilemma, put it on, write it down, and then maybe we can bring it to the table. We're going to have it's going to be kind of a round table meeting that evening. We've also got, tonight's Kickoff Your Morning with Coffee, Kickoff. Then it's Friday night, Lights Out, Tackling the Problem. I did not come up with these. You're in the Red Zone. That's going to be Mark Murphy, and that's our day event on December 7th. So that's with all of our staff. And then we've got Studying the Playbook. That's going to be our growth night where we go over our book review. And I didn't know that periodization is a word, but roots of periodization. Did you know that was a word? I had no idea. Aaron at the office came up with these, so it's great. So that's going to be Marco Brindes is going to be on a Wednesday evening in January 9th. And then we have our huddle, which is our complex cases. So we're going to do a few more case planning together. So I'll maybe reach out to you guys. If you have anything you want to present, please let me know to bring to the table. So the books this year, you saw them when you came in, I think. The Energy Bus. Rob's in charge again this year, did a phenomenal job. This book is 10 Rules to Fuel Your Life, Work, Team with Positive Energy. I mean, you got it. I mean, you got the energy. So it's I read this 5 years ago actually, and it's a small book. It's succinct, but it's got a ton in it, and we have a workbook with it too, right? Will you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So the book is really good. I don't know if you guys remember reading it or not, but it's small, a lot of meat in it. It's an entertaining book because it's a lot of visuals and stuff like that. And 10 principles on the energy bus. And so next Friday, my staff is doing a book review on the book. So there's a field guide to it. So we're going to go through it, and Rick was going to try to come, but unfortunately, he's not going to be able to make it. But anyway, so once we do that, I think I'll have a better idea if we're going to follow this field guide or do something else. Because for the extra book last year, I had these, I guess she was the book reviewer. I don't know what her husband was, but we had this couple come in and review a book that we had done as an extra book. So I know they're always available and ready to go. So okay. I'm just going to figure out what the best way is to do this. But it's a really incredible book. There's some really great messages in it. And our theme for my staff this year was energy. It's putting the energy in the right places, not putting the energy where it doesn't belong. And so I think this fits right along with what we're doing with the homecoming.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for doing that. We're also going to have an extra book this year. It's one that it's another. We had done the Boys on the Boat, and that was really powerful. I like the World War II, those stories. And this is another take on it. This is actually called Goodbye Darkness. It's a memoir of the Pacific War. This guy is William Manchester. You guys ever heard of him? He did Winston Churchill's biography, and then he also did General Douglas MacArthur's. So he's amazing. And this is one about him and how he wrestled with because he was deployed there for a while, and how his demons kept haunting him for decades, and how he went back and he's written about it, and it just hits on so many different levels. It's just a wonderful book. Not to mention there's a lot of good history, and he's an amazing storyteller. So that's going to be our optional book. We're probably going to do a separate review for the optional book for those that want to be involved in that. So I'm also going to be purchasing that for you guys. So those of you that want to, let me know, and I'll order it for you. Okay. All right. So Clarke. Clarke and I go back a long ways. He doesn't know that, but I've been going to his coffee shop, Highland Coffee's in the North Gates for 20 years. So when I was, right when I was in residency and rotated up here the first time is when I started going. And still going now. In fact, I was there, I was there last night, finishing up some things for today. And there were some consistencies with what I saw about his business that I couldn't understand. And so I sat down with him and I said, Clarke, tell me about a few of these things. I think I'd like for you to come and talk to our club about some of these principles that you use over these 3 decades. That's why I titled it this, because once you hear him speak about this, you're going to hear that he's just developing people, and that's what he wants. He wants to leave a lasting impact on all the people that come to work for him. But even more importantly is how he develops that employee and to fill a role. So, Clarke, if you want to come on up. So, Clarke, his background's in social work, so that's how he kind of sees the world, right?
If you say so.
Yeah,
To some
I
extent,
think it sounded like when we were having our conversation, it was kind of like I could tell that you want to develop people. You want them to get better. So tell us. I want you to tell everyone about how you. We'll get started by how do you hire and how do you train, and then also the interview process.
Okay, first of all, thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and so I do have an undergrad degree in business and a graduate degree in social work. So I think running my coffee shop is sort of half and half. I have had customers tell me I run it too much like a social worker. So, but I think it's half and half. So you want me to talk about the hiring process? I do have about 25 college students who work for me at any time. The reason there's so many is because they're all in school, they all work part-time, and we're open 7 days a week, 16 hours a day, so you need a lot of people to man the place. I do try to keep employees as long as possible, I guess we all do, and that's one of my challenges, because if you have constant turnover, that's all you do is hire and train all the time. Being next to LSU, I think I do have I'm fortunate to have a pretty good pool of applicants. So, kids are looking for jobs while they're in college, and so we get a steady stream of applications all throughout the year, especially at the beginning of each semester. So, I do all the hiring. If firing needs to be done, I do all the firing too, but that's pretty rare. But my staff is the most important part of the business because they interact with customers. I'll interact with customers, I'll serve customers from time to time, but it's more of a novelty. I'm a little bit rusty. So since my staff is interacting with all the customers all day long, it's obviously a very important role in the business. So I take the hiring very seriously. The application is fairly standard, but I look really carefully at the application, try to look for certain characteristics, and I'll also, if an employee took that application, I'll ask the employee, what did you notice about this applicant? Tell me what you felt about this applicant. And do whatever kind of research I can ahead of time, because I get so many applications, there's no way I can't interview everybody, not by a long shot. So I have to sort of sift through them ahead of time. And then I'll call somebody, set up an interview. The interview, I always forget to tell them this, but the interview rarely lasts less than 2 hours. And to me, it's just normal. It doesn't even occur to me there's something unusual about that. But I'm reminded by my staff that is unusual. And I think that at most retail jobs, the applicant's going to get about a 10-minute interview. And so these go on a lot more. You just can't learn anything in 10 minutes. So we'll talk about all sorts of things. I just want to engage in conversation, get to know them as best I can. And at the same time, also, if I get a feeling like this person might get hired, then the training actually begins right there. So I'm talking about the shop, trying to let them know how we're different, what's important, what I'm looking for in employees. And then there's a certain percentage that I don't hire, but most of the ones that get a 2-hour interview, most of them are going to get hired. If the interview is not going well, then it'll maybe last 30 minutes or so, and then I'll kind of end it. But
Tell them how that, when you told me that the interview is actually part of the training process. You're actually training them during those 2 hours.
Yeah, that's true. I have not had children. Many of you probably have, so you know what it's like to, if you're teaching somebody, that's usually when they're not paying attention. And so I think often people absorb the most sort of very indirectly. So I'll take advantage of that interview when they're sort of not prepared and start the training right then. We also, the first thing they would do is a tour. Once they get hired, they get a tour of the shop. That lasts about 2 hours. There's a lot of training that goes on then also. And they think they're there for a tour, which is true, but I'm also talking about the values of the shop and what makes our shop different, hopefully what we strive for, and what I'm looking for in employees. And then after the tour, then we'll set up training sessions. The training is mostly done with their coworkers, their new coworkers, and I intervene and I'll go over certain things that their coworkers don't teach too well. But yeah, by the time they start their training with coworkers, they've actually got a few hours of training under their belt, and hopefully they don't even realize it happened. It's just the way you have to train people, in my experience, especially young people. So you take advantage of every opportunity you can. For every 10 hours of any kind of training or sharing of information, they may absorb an hour or two. So it's a very imperfect and hard to understand process, but I'm just constantly teaching and training in the hopes that they absorb a certain amount.
I thought it was pretty interesting when he told me he's interviewed 600 to 700 people over the years. I mean, with 25 employees, I mean, that's 30 years. I mean, that's and over the 20 years I've been going there, when I go up to the front counter, it can be any person, somebody I don't know. It's the same kind of service every time. They're nice. They have the autonomy, and they know what they're doing. There's never been a time there for all the years where there was somebody that didn't know how to make something or what the problem. I mean, it might be that some weird coffee they'll have to look up and they can't find it on you do have kind of a spreadsheet with the price list is difficult to read. I try to help them when I can. But I mean that's amazing to me. What really stood out too is that for your position, these are all part-time workers. You spend 2 hours interviewing. So what struck me about this is what's the limit? You call out what their average interview time is in their practices. I mean, I'll start. I mean, 15 minutes typically. I mean, my office, I rely on my office to help me, but usually 15 minutes, maybe 20. Does anybody have?
Talk about that a little bit though. You've got a pretty impressive group of people that you've been able to put together.
I don't. It's not because of my interview skills. I can tell you that. I don't know what it's from, but it's. Well, we get that. That's kind of a separate thing, but I do rely on the people that have been with me the longest to help me decide who will fit in with what we do. And the other thing I think I can say that I do have in common with you, nothing else that you were going to say that I do, but one thing is that I try to live out the values that I tell. So when somebody comes in and says, well, family's important to me, I say, well, it's important to me too. And how we do vacations is important to me. And all the things you were saying about how you live out those values in your practice, I mean, in your business and in my practice, it's important because it needs to be consistent. And you want to, if you say you're going to have some flexibility in your vacation time, we are. I mean, usually we have a lot of flexibility in our office, and just as you do. And you've got a lot of people that can help take up the slack too. And that's been part of the recipe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Add something. Yeah. Well, I mean, those are all important points. We're fortunate to have so many employees that, in theory at least, there's always somebody you can fill in a slot. If you've got a staff that's only 3 or 4 people, and then one person gets sick or one person's on vacation, things get very tight. But luckily, we have a lot of employees. The other thing is that we have slow periods, pronounced slow periods, being next to LSU. So we're pretty busy during the school year. We get very slow whenever the students are gone. And so that's a natural time for people to take time off. So if we were busy 12 months a year, it might be a little bit more complicated. I will say that, we're sort of touching, here and there on a lot of different important subjects. But customer service is the most important part of the business, not the competence of the service you're providing. In other words, I learned a long, long time ago that the quality of our coffee was secondary to the service that people received. And this is interesting, you and I talked about this. As an analytical person, it wasn't natural for me to understand this right away. When I first opened, I thought, surely the quality of my coffee is going to be the most important part of the business. It absolutely was not, and it never has been. We take a lot of pride in it. I go to great lengths to find the best coffee in the entire world. We bring it into the shop, we roast it in the shop. I mean, we take it really, really seriously. But it's always secondary to the service. And I got that message reinforced over and over by people. They would see me at a store or a restaurant, and they'd say, hey, you're the guy who owns that coffee shop. I would say, yes. And they would say, we really like your shop. And I would say, thank you. And they would immediately follow with, we love your employees, always. And then I would say, you know, what about the coffee? And they say, oh, your coffee is great too. But that was always secondary. So,
Tell them about quacking bushes.
yeah, so it occurred to me really not that long ago when I was talking to my staff. There was a coffee shop that I went to at UT in Austin when I was in grad school. There was only one coffee shop. Obviously, the coffee shop landscape has changed tremendously over the last 30 years. And there was one coffee shop in Austin right next to the campus. It was called Quackin' Bushes. They're actually still there. They now go by Quacks. They cut it short. And I can still, to this day, that was 30 plus years ago, remember the employee I interacted with at that shop. This is a profound point, at least for me, that this sort of innocent customer interaction at the counter in a coffee shop can stick with a person, an analytical person, for 30 years, maybe 50, or maybe 100 years. And it's funny the things that stick to us. And so I tell my employees this, that you're not just sort of dispensing caffeine. The interactions you have may seem insignificant, but actually these interactions can stick with people forever. And so I'm just reminded over and over that it's all about the interaction. It may only last 30 seconds, but it may seem secondary to the latte or whatever it is you're serving the customer. But in fact, that interaction, that person-to-person interaction, is the most important thing that happens when people come into my coffee shop. And so when I hire, I'm looking for friendly people, number one. I'm not looking for geniuses. I'm not looking for coffee shop experience. I'm looking first and foremost for friendly people and people who are positive. There's a lot of intelligent people, a lot of energetic people, a lot of hardworking people who are not positive. And they're not good for the business. So I'm doing the best I can to find positive, friendly people. Sometimes I make mistakes, but that's what I'm looking for.
Goes right along with the energy bus, the book we're going to be reading about. Positive energy, who steals your energy, who doesn't steal your energy, who gives you energy. And I mean, all the things you're saying, I mean, I can remember interactions I had with some of the people at your shop years ago. And I think, I think it's amazing that you can have in that short period of time something that can linger with you. Does anybody have any stories, anything that comes to mind with an interaction? I had one fairly recently that will always be with me, and that was when we're trying to get something printed really quick for my dad. And we had just this great person that was at Office Depot of all places. Not known for the customer service, that's my check. But she stayed late for us. She knew what the circumstances were to get this thing printed that we need. And she was just kind, and it wasn't, it was really a special person. It was a special moment. So just that little bit of interaction can linger. I thought that's incredible that 30 years later you remember that person. Now, when it comes down to, when I think about your circumstances, you do have an applicant pool, which is pretty nice. There's a lot of highly educated students there. I think that a lot of times we limit our applicant pool considerably, right? I mean, I think all of us have interviewed maybe the same person, over the, I mean, they answer all the same ads. We all interview the same person. We're not spending 2 hours with them because we think, well, we got to take this person, right? I mean, we don't have that option. But you said it's how do we reach maybe somebody that just got those specific skill sets, but wants to bring it into a healthcare environment, and that's been difficult, I think, everyone in here has a problem with that, right? When you have turnover and you can't find somebody. I think that one thing you were telling me was let's see. When you were saying when you were talking about the employee development aspect of what you feel is, I think that's part of your calling from what I'm gathering now. And that's that you want each employee, when they leave, to have something that they'll remember from your job and your interaction with them forever. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, when we set out in business, we don't really know where we're going to end up 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years later. And so it's all kind of a surprise to me too. I've got one shop. I never really planned to have a chain, but I never really thought to myself that I'll only ever have one shop, but that's the way it's turned out. And what's most important to me is trying to create memories and great experiences for my customers, but also for my employees. So to me, it's a natural connection because they're in school, they're learning things in their classes, and I tell them, you're going to learn things in the job, hopefully, that they would never teach you in class. So they may not grasp it at the time, they may figure it out 10 or 15 years later, but I've had employees come back to me, they come back during the holidays, and they could have worked at my shop 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago, and they come back and visit at Thanksgiving or Christmas and talk about their experience at Highland Coffees. And so some things sink in later after they get more experience in the world. But it is important to me to try to teach certain values and skills and things that I think are important for them to be successful later in life. So it's not only about the customer experience, it's also about the employee experience. That's important to me. And I think that if I had a chain of shops, this wouldn't be an option. But with one shop, I'm able to focus pretty intensely on sharing something with employees and really getting to know my customers and focusing on the customers. So for me, now, I don't have a lot of money to show for it, but I have a lot of personal satisfaction because of all the relationships that I've developed with employees and with customers.
And I think some of you may be wondering, well, do you have employee meetings all the time, and you must have all this time to do, and you have, but you really don't. Or you said ideally you'd have a meeting with all the staff, once a semester, but a lot of times you don't even get to do that. I think that what's impactful about it is that the training, it begins at the interview, and you're right, you're not teaching. They don't realize they're learning when you're giving them this long tour. I mean, I don't think I gave you a tour of the office when you came in. I feel bad. I mean, I didn't even give you a tour. I mean, you're doing awesome, but and they need to see, okay, this is what we're proud of. This is what we do, and the subtle things in the way that you speak to them and the way that you spend time with them that's huge.
So first of all, we do have a meeting at least once a semester. Well, I think what I said to you is I would love to have one once a month, but that we can't do. It's very hard with students and their class schedules and their extracurricular schedules. It's hard to get everybody together for meetings, but we at least do at the beginning of every semester, if not more often. But then there's many, many individual interactions, individual conversations, memos. There's other ways to teach throughout the semester. But yeah, during the tour, I'm not just pointing out what happens in this room, what takes place in this room. We talk about the green coffee, where it comes from, why it's important, why we roast coffee, and we talk about all sorts of things as we go from room to room. So I am trying to be indirect, and hopefully it's sinking in.
We went on a tangent when you and I were talking about millennials and how, and seeing as you've interviewed 700 people about, I wanted to get your take on millennials, since you're right there and you're surrounded by them.
Well, I don't want to get anything too controversial. I don't want to insult anybody. I think the millennials are going to make a great contribution one day, that when they're running everything. But I have noticed differences over the last 5 or 8 years. There's certainly some similarities among young people and among employees over all these years, but there's also some differences. And you seemed a little surprised, like maybe it was just it was an idea that didn't necessarily have a lot of validity, and I don't have science to back me up, but I have noticed some things that are a lot more difficult now than they seemed to be a few years ago. So it's anecdotal evidence, but they struggle with teamwork. Teamwork's a really big issue. Supporting their teammates. They struggle with commitment. They sort of want to dabble in things and not really commit to anything. I have a hard time keeping them as long as I'd like to. We try to keep people until they graduate. It's always rare that somebody would leave the job before they graduate, because there's no reason to. It's a good job. It's very flexible. We take their studies really seriously, so they'll never be expected to work, before they have a test. We take their vacation time very seriously. All their extracurricular things are taken seriously. The pay is competitive. So the atmosphere is nice. There's no reason to leave. But the last several years, there's just a certain percentage that just sort of are in and out. And so I find myself sort of getting frustrated with the staff about certain issues, and it does seem to be related to this particular generation and the way they grew up, and they seem to be more self-centered. Yeah, very, very fragile in terms of, now, I mean, I'm not that critical, and when I am, I think it's gentle, but the slightest hint of criticism, and they really get upset, and they might just leave right then. So, they call them the snowflakes, the snowflake generation. So I assume there's science being done now to try to figure out exactly what's going on with this generation. My evidence is anecdotal, but there do seem to be differences now compared to past generations of employees.
By the way, the bartenders agree.
There's always exceptions. There's always exceptions to the rule.
And you know why I seem surprised when you said that? Is because
What is the year for millennials again?
would,
1980 or 1981 to what,
You mean when they were born, or?
Yeah, when they
Oh,
were
they were born. Okay, that's pretty old. 1981.
I would agree, because I'm just turned 36 and I'm considered a millennial.
I think of people, for me it's people who are in college the last 5 to 7 years, something like that. So I'm thinking of a much more recent group of college students.
1995 is iGen or Gen Z. Those are the people that are having problems with self-marginalizing and,
What's the generation called?
Z?
Z? Oh, Z.
Z.
Sorry, I can't hear
That's
you.
that's an X.
Millennials born 81 to 96.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. So it's Z, really? You're talking about Z.
Well, 96, they're born in 96, they would now be 22.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, that's more or less correct.
The reason when you said it, I looked kind of surprised is because I really don't like painting a whole, when you paint a group, and I've always tried to fight against that because it's easy to do. You want to just define. You don't want to have to seek out these individuals that don't have those same qualities, So that's why I was interested to hear you say that. Because
Well, there's certainly exceptions. I mean, I've had some extraordinary employees over the last few years, but they stand out a little bit more now than they used to from the pack. But there's definitely exceptions, and again, I think the millennials are going to be, I think that everything that shaped them into who they are is going to make them very well suited for the future. But I think it's important, if there are differences, it's important to know, because if you're losing your staff more quickly than before, you've got to figure out how to retain your staff. What is it that you need to do differently to communicate with them, to get them to be the best employees possible so that they stay and they contribute instead of turning over too quickly?
how does that fit into the value? You said that the business reflects the values of the owner. We talked about that a little bit, about how your values, making sure your value, and that because it really falls back on what we were talking about, is how a lot of times the businesses reflect us, good and bad.
Well, I mean, that's certainly true. I'm responsible for everything. So regardless of how millennials are acting, good or bad, it's ultimately my business, and I'm responsible for everything. And I've got to figure out what's going on if there are issues with the staff. But yeah, certainly I mean, you're touching on, I think, on an important subject, and that is that the business reflects, it all goes back to the owner's values. So, I mean, the walls in the shop are blue because I like blue. So, I mean, so the shop does reflect. Now, obviously you have to meet your customers halfway. It's not just a shrine to things that I like, but you create a business that reflects your values, and you hopefully teach those values to the staff, and they carry out those values, and that's how you distinguish yourself from other businesses. But yeah, if the staff has lots of persistent problems, I mean, I say this all the time, it always goes back to the owner. So if you see a business that's having lots of problems, you're going to probably trace it back to the owner in some way. It's got to be. So, so I do think it's important to know what your values are and to share those values with your staff, and to realize the business reflects your values in every way, and you've got to get those values across to your staff, the best you can.
As we were talking, more and more things started coming up with regard to similarities in our businesses, and one of them was corporate. So I had mentioned that we're kind of fighting corporate dentistry to some degree, and a lot of what you do is non-corporate, being a sole proprietor. So something that caught my attention was that the corporate environment, you said, can't hide the unavoidable preoccupation with bottom line. Tell me about that.
Well, I think that's true. I don't know anything about the dental practice, so I can't speak to what you guys deal with every day, but I do know a lot about coffee business. And so if ever I go into a coffee shop, really, or any business, a restaurant or store, as a business owner for so long, I'm naturally sort of looking around at the strengths and weaknesses of the business that I'm in. And there are big differences between corporate coffee shops and locally run coffee shops. Now, I'm a huge fan of local businesses in general, but there are exceptions. There are some local businesses that are not so great. There are some chains that are pretty darn good. So not all chains are created equal. Not all local businesses are created equal. What I tell people, and try to get across to my staff, is to do their best to support local businesses to the greatest degree they can. So I use the example, if you want to go to the grocery at 10 o'clock at night, you're probably going to Walmart. I mean, the local stores are closed. So there's a certain percentage of the time where you have no choice but to go to a chain. But I try to incorporate local businesses into my own life as much as I can. But I always say well-run local businesses, because some people think, wait a minute, I've got a local business in mind and it sucks. And so that happens. But I think it's important to support well-run local businesses for a whole bunch of reasons. But while Starbucks and other coffee chains sell coffee like I do, that's about where the similarities end. I mean, we're so different in every other way. And just in terms of the way we have personal relationships with customers, the way we interact with our employees, and my staff and I talk about this all the time. I mean, Starbucks, I have a great respect for Starbucks. They have 25,000 stores, and that's only the beginning of their empire, their coffee empire. And I have a hard time running one coffee shop, much less 25,000 coffee shops. It's kind of mind-boggling how big that company is. And I do respect what they do, but the experience of going into a coffee shop, going into a Starbucks is very different. And they have every second of the day is calculated, and every square inch of their store is calculated to how it affects the bottom line. Most of Starbucks business, it goes to the drive-through. Each store is different, but something like 70% of their business will typically go through a drive-through. So you're not even, and that's how they prefer it. You throw your money up on the counter, and you drive away, and you're not in their store making a mess, going to the bathroom, taking up a seat. So they love the drive-through business, and that's why most of their stores are going to have a drive-through. My shop doesn't have a drive-through, so it's all much more personal in the store. But they calculate how long it takes from the moment a person enters the drive-through and give their order. They're calculating how long it takes that person to be served. and they want a person, I don't know what the time is, like a minute and a half or 2 minutes. They want a person past the window and on to the next customer. But you know, the way the shops are shaped, every single detail is based on how it affects the bottom line. And I'm not really blaming them for that. That's who they are. And they have shareholders, and they've got to constantly increase share value, or people sell the stock. I mean, it's a public entity. And so that's just the nature of a big public entity. But yet, it's radically different from the experience that we give. We're trying to create lasting memories and sort of magical moments with our customers. Now, Starbucks may say that in their literature, but that's the last thing they're concerned about. They're concerned with getting you a decent, consistent drink and getting you out and moving on to the next customer.
And that can't help but trickle down to the employee, that mindset. Even if they come in as that, you know, with a different idea of what they want out of a job, or you know, what they have to offer to an employer, with that and the times and how everything is cultivated, and really, because you're right, they have to, you know, shareholder value is ultimately most important. So I think that's the thing that we all here have that in common as well, because I mentioned to you that corporate dentistry is coming in, and it's, you know, it's here to stay. But I always think that we'll have that people will always be in search of this in this relationship-based dentistry. Steve?
So, a few years ago, there was an issue with the rent. And you guys worked that out.
Yeah.
But it from a outside perspective, it seems like the way that all worked out was the people who supported the people kind of came to the support of the group. That they said, look, you know, we like this organization. We want to keep this company here. And your customers kind of jumped up and came in and kept it going. So they sort of paid it back.
You're right. That was something I didn't expect. I assumed we would just renew the lease like I had always done. Now, this was a relatively new owner of the complex. They hadn't owned it for all the years before. But we were talking about renewing the lease, and then at the last second they said, well, we decided to kick you out. And so it kind of caught me totally by surprise. I had a feeling it wouldn't go over well with my customers, but I didn't know what would happen. So I put up an announcement to my customers saying, look, I'm sorry we have to close, you know, in a few months. And then they kind of exploded with emotion. And so it was a very interesting, emotional, and surprising experience for everybody that happened. Now, one thing I talk to my employees about is that they're not there long enough for someone to come back who's been gone for 5 or 10 years and say, hey, I used to hang out here when I was in school, and this shop meant a lot to me. But I've been there forever, obviously, and I've heard this over and over and over. We've had people ask to get married at our shop, and we've allowed that to happen. You can't say no to somebody if they want to get married on your property. But yeah, a lot of times, you know, customers keep a lot of their feelings to themselves. You don't know how they're connecting with the business. And so when that lease issue happened and they all sort of rose up and said, no, we want this business to stay here, it was very emotional because they had a deep connection with the business, and they also couldn't understand the rationale behind what was taking place, so that there was some legitimate questions that they had. But that is the goal, to connect so deeply with people that they have that kind of emotional connection. And then this episode arose where they had an opportunity to express that all at once. But I have had people come to me many, many times and say, when I was a student, I used to hang out here a lot, and this place meant so much to me. And I had that feeling. When I was going to Quackenbush's in Austin, I would go study there every day. And there's just something about certain businesses where little by little, over time, you form an emotional connection. And I'm not sure if that happens enough with a dentist, because you guys only see your patients so many times each year. But I think maybe over time that probably does happen. It has the potential to happen. But that's the goal to me. So that is not the goal at Starbucks, believe me. Again, what they say in their literature and what they say, you know, behind closed doors are two very different things. And maybe some people do have emotional connections with Starbucks. But again, it's at a chain, there's so much turnover there's not only turnover, there's turnover all throughout this massive company. So at my shop, we have a certain amount of turnover. Naturally, when people graduate, they tend to move on. But I'm always there, and the shop is still the same. In fact, it looks very similar to how it always looked. So there's something that's there to remind people of what they experienced. Whereas with the chain, if you go back to some store that you used to go to, it's probably not going to be there. All the employees are going to be different. There's really nothing, there's nothing there that reminds you of the experience you used to have. But yeah, that is our goal. This is what I talk to the staff about all the time. We're trying to make people's lives better through what we do. And at first that might sound, somebody might think that's a little grandiose, it's just a coffee shop. But I believe in the power, not only of coffee shops, but probably of all businesses. When you're interacting with people, if you really value them and you show that care for them and you love them, then they feel that and they keep that with them. And hopefully you won't have an experience where your landlord is trying to kick you out all of a sudden. But you know, you do find out in an odd situation like that what your customers feel about your business.
And when if I told you that my home away from home is Chime Street, what do y'all think? Right? I mean, if you go down Chime Street, that is a hard place to do business. Now I spent, you know, it really is. Highland Coffee is like my home away from home because that's where I go. My daughter and I go there and spend time together. And it's just a really hard place to do business. And I think that was amazing what had happened with the lease problem and this grassroots effort of the emotional, you know, youth forms that you've had with your customer base, and especially since you've been able to be there for so long, which I mean, there's constant vacancies.
Well, it is true. It's very surprising. There's a lesson here, and that is you don't really know what's going on in a business or at a location until you talk with that owner. Because people are always surprised. They think, what is going on Chime Street? Why are all these vacancies here? Why can't any business survive? You know, you're right across from LSU. It seems like such an easy place to make a go of a business and to succeed. And that's the issue. That's the problem right there, because it seems so good. There's an endless pool of people who want to get into business and who think, I want to be on Chime Street because it's right across from LSU, and it's got, you know, they don't take the next step and say, wait a minute, if it's so easy, why are all these vacancies here? But it's emotional. They think, you know, I have a connection with LSU. I want to have my business right next to LSU. This is where I went to school. And so what happens is the landlords charge really outrageous rents, generally speaking, on that street because they can get away with it, because there's so many people who will say, I'll pay that crazy rent because I want to be right next to LSU, and gosh, with 30,000 students across the street, it's got to be easy. And then they find out either within a few days or a few weeks of opening, and certainly by the first school holiday, that they're really surprised by the predicament they're in. And I've seen this over and over and over. The ones who have the best chance of surviving, assuming it's a well-run business, are the ones, first of all, who own their own property. Because you're not dealing with a landlord who's trying to constantly increase your rent to the point where you get pushed out and then they start the process over with somebody else, because there's always somebody who will say, I want that spot, I want to be next to LSU, I don't really care what the rent is. But the students are gone. People are surprised that the students are gone 16 weeks a year. They're always gone. I don't know if any of you have college-age kids, but I don't remember there being that many holidays when I was in school. Maybe there were. It just seems like every time I turn around, there's another holiday. And so 16 weeks a year, the students are gone. That's 4 months. That is 1/3 of the year, your main base is gone. And that does not even include summer school. But if you add up all the holidays, it's 16 weeks plus summer school, which is slower than ever because of TOPS. So a lot of kids don't go to summer school. But 16 weeks plus another 2 months of summer, I mean, your main base is gone. And then it's very isolated over there, so people don't want to drive that far out of their way when they can go to similar businesses that are easier to get to. There's the fear that there's nowhere to park. Chime Street is particularly difficult because it's buried behind Pleasant Hall. There's very little traffic on Chime Street, say, compared to Highland Road. So there's a lot of things that don't meet the eye, and a lot of people are surprised that it's so difficult. And so I'll see them come in with a great deal of enthusiasm and really kind of an effort that leaves a little bit to be desired because they think this is going to be so easy. And then they find out with their new business it's very, very hard. And so there's a tremendous amount of turnover. And I wish it weren't that way. And I'm kind of leaning towards the idea that maybe Chime Street is better for residential because it makes sense to have apartments on Chime Street. But businesses are really, really difficult on Chimes. And I tell people there hasn't been a successful opening on Chime Street in 30 or 40 years, going back to the 1970s. My shop opened on the corner of Highland and Chimes. So we were on the corner of Highland and Chimes for 6 years, had a lot of visibility. There were no other coffee shops in town really, besides Coffee Call, which is more of a beignet place, for the most part. And so we were there in town for a number of years before any competitors came along. And it had a lot of visibility on Highland Road, and that kind of gave us a strong start. But for me to open up my business on Chime Street today would be really, really perilous. But if you do open on Chime Street, you better plan to be the very best there is at whatever you do. And I find people can tend to be kind of middle of the pack. You don't stand a chance if you're the middle of the pack on Chime Street. You've got to be so extraordinary that people are willing to fight and drive over there and deal with the parking issues. And even then, it's probably impossible nowadays. But you certainly can't be mediocre because you don't stand a chance on Chime Street if you're just average.
I want you to talk a little bit. You got to talk a little bit about coffee. You have to. So he brought some coffee. He brought some green beans. Has anyone tried to roast coffee? Yeah, I'm the only insane one in here.
I want to.
Yeah, you want to buy a coffee roaster? I didn't give that, but yeah, your coffee's so good. I didn't even keep going through the process of getting it right. But you brought some green beans. You also brought some Columbia Supremo.
Some New Guinea, some French roasted Kenyan.
Okay, fresh roasted Kenyan, double A, which I just found out what that is. If you tell us what that is too, I mean, we can just kind of pass the badge on it.
Yeah, is it over here? Yeah. Y'all can kind of look at what I brought. I guess, I'm not sure how many of you know that coffee starts with the raw product, which is the green bean, called green coffee or green bean. And that is actually the seed of a coffee cherry. Inside the coffee cherry, you've got the seeds. Those are washed and dried, and then packed in burlap sacks and shipped around the world. So we receive green coffee from around the world, and then you roast that in a special roaster, which is like a rotating oven. And you roast it very skillfully, and then you get a medium roast, a light roast, a medium roast, a dark roast, depending on how long you keep it in the roaster. And so these are samples of some green coffee, some dark roasted beans, and also some a medium roasted bean from New Guinea. So there's a Kenyan dark roast, a special pea berry, which is a very small bean from New Guinea, and then the green coffee, which is from Costa Rica, just to look at. I did want to go back to one thing, and that is about Tiger Town or the North Gates. If you're like under 35 or 40, you know the name, the North Gates. If you're over that, you think of Tiger Town. It's the same place, just different nicknames. But if you say Tiger Town to a young person nowadays, they have no idea what you're talking about. They know the North Gates nickname. But I really love that neighborhood. I was drawn to that neighborhood as a student. It's got a lot of character. It's such an interesting history. There have been amazing businesses in Tiger Town going back to the 1920s. And I actually have studied the history and gathered up the history and photographs of Tiger Town for many, many years. And I give presentations on the history of the neighborhood because I think it's so interesting. And Baton Rouge has kind of a shortage of cool historic districts. Unlike New Orleans, where I'm from, where every neighborhood seems to be historic and really interesting, Baton Rouge has kind of a shortage of those kind of neighborhoods. And so I'm really passionate about the survival of Tiger Town, and that Baton Rouge needs Tiger Town. And Chime Street was the original sort of street where everything developed, in Tiger Town. And Tiger Town developed when LSU moved its campus in the 1920s to where it is now. That's when Tiger Town started developing. and all the businesses and apartments were created to provide those services for the LSU community back in the 20s. But there's only one commercial district in Baton Rouge that's older, and that's downtown, which is where Baton Rouge started. Everything else, commercial/residential, is younger than Tiger Town. Obviously, Spanish Town and Beauregard Town are very old, but those are pretty much strictly residential. So Tiger Town is pretty important, and I don't think Baton Rouge and LSU should take it lightly that there's struggles there. And believe me, there are interests out there that would love to tear it all down and put up a big student apartment complex. And then the history would be wiped out forever. And so I love the history and the character of that neighborhood. And we have this amazing festival. I doubt any of you have been to it. Maybe you have. There's a festival called the Northgate Fest. It takes place once a year in the fall. It's live music and art and food, and it's on Chime Street. This year it's on November 2nd. I encourage any of you who might want to venture out. It's on a Friday night, the Friday before the Alabama game. And we show a slideshow on one of the buildings of historic photos from the neighborhood, which is really cool. The music's amazing every year. There's a whole bunch of art booths. Louis and the Chimes and a couple others will have food booths. The Abita will be selling beer there. And it's all to sort of remind people of the history of that neighborhood.
Who has questions for Clarke? It's been great. Anybody have any? Yes.
Up in the dark, medium roast and light roast. Which one contains the most caffeine?
This is a question that comes up a lot. I guess because it's sort of counterintuitive, and people think, wait, something doesn't make sense. But the longer you roast the bean, the more caffeine roasts out of the bean, which means that a dark roast has less caffeine. So the lighter the roast, the more caffeine. And I would guess, theoretically, the green bean itself has the most caffeine because it's untouched. And then the longer you roast it, more caffeine roasts out of the bean. However, I tell people, we'll sometimes have young people, they want to stay up all night, and they say, give me the thing that has the most caffeine in it. And I'll say, well, it's better to get the thing you like, and then maybe get a little bit more of it. But you don't want to get something simply for the caffeine. If you don't like it, you're not going to enjoy that drink. So, but yeah, technically, the lighter the roast, the more caffeine.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was wondering okay, so through a 2-hour interview, I'm sure that you go through a lot of questions. And what do you find to be the question that reveals most about a person?
I don't think there is one question. There are certain questions I'd like to ask. I'll say, as an employee, tell me 2 things that you think make you an excellent employee. Tell me 2 things that you think make you less than perfect as an employee. And so I'll have a few questions like that, but really, it's the interaction about random subjects. So we'll talk about their family, their interests, what music they like, what books do they read, and we're just sort of rambling from subject to subject just to see how they interact. So it's more just the sense that I get about their, how positive and friendly they are. There's a lot of intuition involved. It's not science for me. I'm sure there is a science of interviewing, but I'm just looking for somebody who I think would fit in on the staff, and hopefully I don't hire seniors because chances are they're not going to be there very long. And so I am looking for someone who's younger, ideally a sophomore. So that as a freshman, everything's new and unpredictable, as to whether they're going to stay and how, whether they're going to make it, even make it at LSU. I will hire freshmen. I prefer sophomores. I might hire a junior. I will not hire a senior. I've actually hired a couple of seniors and I regretted it because they were the best. They were the most evolved. They learned fast. They were great, but then they were gone in 1 year, and I was sorry that happened. But it's really just talking about anything that's interesting or anything they want to talk about, and I'm looking for their personality and for just their nature to come out.
I asked him that exact same question because I wanted to cut to the chase. Like, give me your best question, Rob.
I find the generational conversation really interesting. We brought this up last year. Because I have 7 millennial twins and we have wonderful substitutes. And I even have partner millennials on the higher end of it. And I really feel like it's it's an interesting conversation because for guys like Steve and myself, I mean, I think our generation was, oh, those are the guys that swiveling their hips and smoking dope and doing all this stuff, you know. So I find in general that conversation is interesting. But I think the one thing that we try to remember, and I think it's the same thing with your coffee shop, is the same people you're trying to hire are now your customers too. So millennials are parents that we deal with. So my question to you is the ones that you keep, is there insight that you get from them that helps your company to relate better to the millennial customer that comes into your store?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that certainly you're right. The employees are a lot like the customers. And they have a language that maybe they speak. Some of it's conscious, some of it's not. You know, as they interact, that I may not catch on to. So they understand things about each other that I may not get. But I'm not sure how much insight they have for me in terms of how to train the staff, how to run the business. They have so much to learn. You know, thinking about generations, it's obvious there's going to be differences from generation to generation. That is, to me, is undisputable. Now, what those differences are, that's a subject for experts to figure out. When you think about what we've seen change in front of our eyes over the last 15, 20 years in terms of the internet, social media, you know, cell phones, I mean, everything has changed in such a big way, and these kids grew up in that environment. I mean, we had a computer class in my high school, and it was pretty novel to even have a computer course, much less, you know, to grow up using a computer from the time you're like 2 years old. So they're definitely, everything is different about how they've grown up. But in terms of, I don't know that I've gotten a whole lot of advice. Now, they probably have some advice for me on how to use social media, you know, what things they're interested in. You know, young people love Instagram. I really don't care for it. I'm not putting it down. I'm sure it's useful. Many of you probably use it. I know my competitors use it. So I think they have a lot to teach about what media they respond to, how they interact with each other on social media. But the main focus for me is trying to teach the importance of customer service. And they're also dealing with people of all age groups. It's not only, we have a lot of older customers too, it's not just students. How to be good teammates, how to do their share. We talk about sharing the burdens, and I always put that in quotes because the burdens for them, you know, like doing some cleaning around the shop. We have to clean all the time. So that's a very minor burden compared to what the rest of life is going to dish out for them. As we all know, it gets, you know, in some ways life gets harder and harder and harder. It gets better and better in some ways too. But what they think is hardships at their age is nothing compared to what's coming down the pike. So we talk about sharing the burdens. So, for example, we're open on Friday and Saturday night. We're open every day until 11 o'clock at night. We have to take turns working PM shifts. We have to take turns working around the holidays. Now, we are closed Christmas and Thanksgiving and a couple of other days. But we have to communicate. We have to coordinate our vacation times. We've got to make compromises. We've got to take turns, like I said, doing things that are not as fun, like working on Friday night, cleaning. And by the way, I do more of that than any of them. So I would never expect any of them to do something that I don't do all the time and sort of lead by example. But that's what I spend the most time doing, is teaching them how to be good employees, good coworkers, you know, good friends to people they're working with, and also teaching the importance of customer service. A lot of young people are very focused on, you've probably experienced latte art, where it's all about the design that's left on top of the drink. To me, yes, it's cute, customers like it, but it's really unimportant compared to other aspects of the interaction with the customer. So I really de-emphasize certain things like latte art, which they're into, and go back to other things that I think are more important, like, you know, listening carefully to what the customer wants and, you know, looking at the customer and being polite, and just these basic elements of customer service.
Questions? Well, I think we'll wrap it up. I got to tell you that really I hope that you guys have gotten from the conversation with Clarke tonight what I got when I sat down with him for an hour and or more, and just about developing people. I think that when I look at his business and especially the story about trying to leaving a lasting impression in a short period of time, and I think that that's ubiquitous in all companies, and also allows you to have a lot of there's people come back. People come back and they talk about their experience. And I think that that's something that I've tried to live by as much as I can, and I think that it goes for everyone here. I mean, I know that there's a lot of similarity. I mean, dentistry is a relationship-based thing. We didn't see our patients as much as you do, but we see them over many years. So. But I really appreciate you being here tonight with us.
I enjoyed it.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much.